name's Rich Daniels. I've born in the Forest of Dean, lived here all my life, and at the moment I'm working in the public forest, on the public forest estate, as you can see around us, and I'm very privileged to be a free miner, which means that the King gave the miners in the Forest of Dean, or the people of the Forest of Dean, the right to minerals in the forest, and be qualified by being born here, working for a year and a day, and being over 21. And some of us are determined to keep that right going, and I'm practicing that as my living at the moment, as you can see. I heard about the forest sell-off from Keith Morgan, who gave me a bell and said, "Have you seen the Telegraph?" And in the Telegraph it said that this was the intention to sell off all the public forest estate.
My name's Jan Royal, Baroness Royal of Blaisdon. Sounds terribly grand, doesn't it? Here I am sitting in my office in the House of Lords, and this is where I was reading a bill, or the bill, called the Public Bodies Bill, and I first realised that there was a clause in that bill which would have allowed this rotten coalition government to sell off our beloved Forest of Dean.
There's a land between two peoples where the morning air's like wine, and the hands that reach in friendship bear the blue scars of the mine, where the tongues sound rough to strangers' ears, but the words they speak are kind. That's the land where I belong, the place for me and mine.
This all began back in October 2010. We saw an article in the Telegraph which said that Caroline Spellman, then Environment Secretary, was planning to sell off half the forests in this country.
And then we thought, well, we better give Mark Harper a ring. We gave his office a ring. He wouldn't speak to us for whatever reason. Maybe he wasn't there. And we were just told, a curt statement, he will not respond to press speculation. Now our next stage was, let's ring up Jan Royal. She said, yes, I think the forest is in danger. So that convinced Viv to run a campaign.
So on October the 28th, 2010, that edition of my newspaper carried the first element of this campaign. My headline was "Hands Off Our Forest." That became the logo. I designed an oak leaf with "Hands Off Our Forest" on it, and that became an iconic part of the HOOF campaign.
Well, we decided that we needed to do something, and we very quickly realised that Dean Forest Voice wasn't going to do that on their own, and we needed to form a group. So we held the first steering group meeting, and we had a very good attendance at that, and we formed a steering group, elected a chairman, secretary, and we started on our road to stop the sell-off of the public forest estate.
I've lived in the forest all my life, and my ancestors on both sides have been here maybe 400 years, I think. On the one side, they were all miners who worked in the pits, so I've had family that have died in the pits. I've also had others that have been transported to Australia for minor transgressions when they came up against the powers that be. But I think what makes the forest special is that it was such an isolated area for many, many hundreds of years that the governments and kings and queens of England just used it as a playground, and they pretty much left us alone. So when they did decide to come to the forest to extract the value of it from the trees and the coal, the minerals, they came up against a very independent-minded people. And I think this is shown when the recent government came in and thought they could just sell off the forest without any opposition. And what it did was galvanised us all, and it allowed people to reconnect with who they are, not just for people that have lived here for generations, but just as importantly, people that have moved in a year, 2 years ago. They choose to live here or they choose to visit it as tourists because it is special and it is beautiful.
I'm Cheryl Mayo and I live in Blakeney. I came to the Forest of Dean in 2008. It's about October 2010. I was just sitting doing something at the computer and my husband came in waving an article from The Guardian at me and said, "Oh, you might be interested in this." And yes, what is it? Well, the government's proposing to sell off the forest. I got hold of Dean Forest Voice actually. Keith Morgan was my first sort of contact on that. And I went along with a neighbour to the meeting in the Speech House Marquee that was held on Bonfire Night 2010. And sort of, you know, with, I think there were 100 or so people there. It was really just the very beginnings of the campaign.
What you're going to look at, the deficit budget will be cut by 29% by 2015. That is a big cut. And that's the Forestry Commission. And what they're saying here is that the Forestry Commission controls, it was 257,000 hectares. Half is going by 2020. That is what it says in there. Caroline Spellman is spelling it out. Half of that 257,000 hectares will be in private hands by the year 2020. That's the fight.
There was this ad hoc meeting called at Speech House, probably about the end of October, and clearly we needed. There was agreement that we had to act. It was a very serious situation because not only was the government proposing to sell off everything, there was also this public bodies bill which would enable the minister to do so at, you know, on request or on demand. So we formed a steering group, and we needed a chairman. Rich Daniels was elected and has proved to be a fantastic chairman. And then they said, "Oh, we need a secretary." And there was a big silence, and eventually I said, "Well, if nobody else wants to do it, I'm happy to take it on." And I think Rich and I sort of said goodbye to about 2 years of our existence from that point on.
There was a lot of anger anyway in the Forest of Dean, and it was I think there was a sense that people were most annoyed about Mark Harper's attitude, refusing to sort of put whatever he had aside. Things reached a bit of a head when he was attending a carers event at the main place in Colford, and I think this was late November 2010.
I'm chairman of the National Forestry Commission Association, Retired Foresters, and I've worked in the Forest of Dean since 1957. I'm here to protest about the possible sell-off of parts of the Forest of Dean and whole parts of English forestry. The forests are not making money in a year, but they are a national asset and have been since the Forest Commission was put in being in 1918. It belongs to you and it belongs to me and it belongs to everybody else. And it shouldn't belong to one person who will then try and make a fortune out of it by doing something other than forestry.
Now the next thing that happened with the campaign was that Graham Morgan and other people in Cinderford said, "We've got to have a public meeting. The best place to have a public meeting is the Miners' Welfare Hall in Cinderford."
Our strong forest trees, the woodlands, the bluebells, the other flora and fauna, the biodiversity, these all belong to us. The people who live in the forest, they are a national asset, they are in public ownership, and that's where they must stay. Who are veterans of past non-political campaigns which saved our forest in the past, and I pay tribute to their fantastic work then and now. It's invidious to name names, but I am going to single out one person who was instrumental in the last campaign and who is tireless in his support now. He writes the most brilliant letters to the press, and he provides us all with invaluable details and history to inform our case. And that's Alan Robertson, who's sitting down here in the front row.
unfortunately Mark couldn't be here tonight. It would have been great if Mark could have been here tonight, and we said, no really, it would have been great for Mark to be here tonight, and we said so. We've met with him earlier this afternoon, and we tried to get over to Mark how important it was for him to come and talk to people. Because the things which he took... Pardon?
What was he frightened of?
Well,
Why the government has run out of cash by selling our land, they want to get it back. Not for sale shall always be our call. Well, times may change, but they somehow stay the same. So we'll rise up and fight once again.
So I was just driving through the forest, looking at the trees and stuff, and I just heard in my in my head the song of "Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round an Old Oak Tree," and I thought, I wonder how that would work. That everybody could do it. That people didn't have to go to London. You didn't have to be anybody. You could just go to a florist shop and buy a length of ribbon and tie it round a tree. And also it was the idea that then maybe people would be asking questions. What are these yellow ribbons? People who had no interest, people driving through, people out of county. And, hopefully they would ask questions. But the other thing, it turned out that actually a lot of the media were very interested because it was very good visually.
Then we started to campaign then, and when the steering group really got to going, then we started to evolve all the different strategies and things which would help us to campaign and persuade the government to change their mind. So that included petitions and letters, which obviously culminated in the meeting at Speech House on that very snowy, stormy day. It couldn't have been better really. It was a snowstorm, but thousands and thousands of people turned out that day. And I think the key thing was that it was a complete cross-section of the community.
We went to Speech House Field, which is traditionally where people have met over hundreds of years to voice their protest. It was a bitterly cold day in midwinter, and no one was quite sure how many people would come. But it was overwhelming that we had over 3,000 people probably. And it was families, it was children, it was grandmothers, grandfathers, all united, dogs, no cats. We had horses, but it was the culmination of the spirit of the forest. The brass bands were there. There was young people doing music. There were speeches from people within the forest and outside the forest who supported what we were doing. And it made headlines in all the papers. And I think at that point, and only at that point, perhaps the government thought, well, our strategy to sell off the forest isn't going to work.
As we walk on our land, it is special. The fields, the cities, the estates, and we damn well won't let you kill it. In the offices that legislate our fate, these words we have as diction are just as important as the grammar in between them. This bed that we lie on is just as important as the lies that we're fed on. The river that ran from the start of the brook contained the letters I took to spell this poem that I speak from. The hand that we're fed from is in no way and will never be the hand that we learn from, because a life led in a country like this should be made up of our own opinions, not fat cat dominions. As we walk on our land, it is special. The fields, the cities, the estates, and we damn well won't let you kill it in the offices that legislate our fate. These kids that have to go out to fix all our mess will be the elders in years that watch the same process, because this torrent of seduction and controlling will last for years and years till our tears become wars. But pause for thought. Where's our fight? Where's our spirit, the thing we have inbuilt in us to protect and serve our own habitat? The ones that have it become corrupt. The ones that don't can't be fucked, and the ones that do and don't will be the ones that suffer the most when our social civilization is burnt. As we walk on our land, it is special. The fields, the cities, the estates, and we damn well won't let them kill it in the offices that legislate our fate.
Then that received quite a lot of coverage, that was well supported by various dignitaries and experts in the environment who came and shared the day with us, and that escalated into a national matter really from that day on. It was well covered in the newspapers, on television, local television and radio, and I think that really started to spark off the imaginations of people all over the country that they could actually share and do the same as we were doing, to persuade the government that it just wasn't one isolated group, it was thousands and thousands and thousands of people all over the country.
So as the momentum increased, people from all over the forest got involved. We had cyclists who did a protest cycle through the forest, and people from here and outside the forest came to that. We also had the husky dogs supporting us at Speech House. Later on, we even had a choir who spent a lot of their time serenading Mark Harper, singing "This land is also your land and our land." I don't think he's very musical, so because he didn't appreciate our harmonies anyway. Another action we did during that time was the trespass of Bircham Woods, because that is a piece of forestry that has been sold off to a private investor because of the tax breaks they give large landowners on forestry that they buy. This was formerly an area where everyone was free to walk and do as they pleased.
The reason why I'm dressed up in a skirt is to celebrate the tradition of forest protest. Skimington Ride was a way of showing dissent and opposition to any members of the community who were behaving in a way which was not acceptable to that community. In the forest, this whole of protest was politicised very much in about 1630, when Lady Skimington, alias John Williams, led a whole load of foresters to tear down fences.
We made our point. We weren't arrested, possibly weren't breaking the law, but the principle was there that if they put up a fence, we will either tear it down or jump over it.
During January, the Forest of Dean District Council was, wasn't actually very interested in the issue, which was quite strange compared to earlier days. It was, I think, on the balance of one vote that it would send a delegation to the House of Lords. And Rupert Bledisloe, Viscount Bledisloe, was with us, and late Eric Morris, Free Miners, John Powell from Fisheries, and Alan Robertson and I gave our speeches. And then in the afternoon we met with Mark Harper in yet another committee room, and we pressed him very, very hard to come on board the Hoof campaign and support. But his line was, no, the forests are safe, the Forest of Dean is quite safe, and he wouldn't. And I do remember Andrew Gardner at the end of that meeting standing up and saying, well, Mark, I can only really express extreme disappointment in your attitude that you're not prepared to take it. Anyway, notwithstanding all that, the campaign was gathering momentum, groups to form from as far afield as Kielder up in the north, right down to Devon and the southeast. And we eventually did form a national campaigns network, which was very useful because we could swap information.
How long till you've had enough of this? I ain't gonna give up anything. I can see you're trying to sell off the land where I live. Let me remind you, you've got a nice place to go when you were cold. Let me remind you, you've got a place till y'all feel safe when you grow old. Let me remind you, got a place you're not ashamed to call your own. So tell them to leave the Forest of Dean alone.
One of the big moments of the campaign, I think, that many of us will remember for a long time is eventually we had a local meeting with Mark Harper, who he called at very short notice in a very small venue, and probably 1,000 people turned up to a venue that could seat about 200.
There were hundreds of people outside that wanted to participate, and obviously they were frustrated. They wanted to talk to their MP, they wanted to debate with him.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from the coast of Cornwall to the Scottish Highlands.
We were told there would be a speaker system to the people outside.
Not by us. You were told that. Well, no, we didn't. We didn't say that to anyone. That was something other people said. So I would urge everybody to respond.
Just over an hour ago, there would be a PA system available.
You told us that about an hour ago.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, people that beforehand that were told, we didn't announce in advance that was going to be the case. So anyway.
An hour ago, there was going to be a PA system.
Is this how you treat your constituents? Leave them outside?
Look, do you want to... Look, we've got them... We've got the maximum... Listen... I'm very happy to listen to all of your points.
Mark, your PA is the PA's not working.
Right.
They don't hear you.
Those of you that were in this room, we have already explained to the people outside that this won't be the only meeting that I'm holding, so that those people can come to this meeting.
Speak up, please.
If I'd stopped yelling, then you would be able to, wouldn't you? But I'm afraid your meeting is being disrupted by the mob outside.
We don't want you in the forest, Harper. Get out.
Well, if you don't want to...
You rearrange this meeting in a proper place where everybody
respond in general about the government's proposals on forestry.
microphone is not working. We cannot hear.
And excuse me.
We can't hear.
Yes, we've secured equipment, and the equipment that we have secured has proven to be faulty. It's not the case that we haven't tried. But those of you that can't hear, it would help if you stop shouting, and if the gentleman at the back would not open the window. I know this is something that's concerned people, is about the Public Bodies Bill. And the Secretary of State has made it clear that the government is going to amend the Public Bodies Bill so that the only power that ministers would have is to transfer the Forest of Dean to a charitable trust, or
can't afford it.
Or leave it. Or leave it in public ownership. Those will be the only two things.
What have we got a referendum then?
Those will be the only two things that the ministers will be empowered to do. So it will. Well, hang on. I've nearly finished. I'll absolutely take the question. And therefore, it will not be possible for ministers in a future government to sell the Forest of Dean to private or commercial owners.
May I ask how you vote, gentlemen?
Yeah, yes, just to let him do
come
it.
back.
I'll answer
Sorry,
that when I answer this gentleman.
Can I just read something to yourself and indeed the congregation today? We will maintain national green belt protection, areas of outstanding natural beauty, national parks, sites of specific scientific interest, and other environmental designations which protect the character of our country's landscape, and in addition, etc. That's your manifesto, Mr. Harper.
Yep.
Now, with respect, from what you said today, and indeed what you've said in the past, and indeed the way you voted, and I've got the voting record here of every MP that was in the House that night.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to share this with yourself or anybody else that's interested. Only one Conservative MP had the bottle, the spine to stand up and say, actually, this isn't right. Now, what I'm trying to ask you is this. Who do you actually represent? Do you represent David Cameron, the Whips, and yourself, or your constituents?
No, I don't think there's a conflict between any of the things we laid out in our manifesto. I made it very clear, the consultation document makes it very clear that we want to protect all the public benefits. So that includes biodiversity, it includes the environment, it includes all the access that people value so highly. And indeed, one of the things we've done even for commercial forests is we've said we're not going to sell the freehold of those, we're going to lease them, so that when we lease them, we can have a commercial owner run them better, but we can still put lots of conditions around them that you could. Well, hang on.
Afford to buy or indeed run our forest.
Hang on a sec. Hang on a sec.
30 pence per year per town.
Let me finish your.
Be quiet and let
me finish.
On you go. Could you tell us who you are? And if My name is Brian Thornton. I'm Vice Chairman of the County Council. Thank you.
Can I say how surprised I am, first of all, at the lack of warning about this meeting. The fact that there isn't room for people in here. The fact that there's no microphone, and usually a microphone is passed around for people to ask questions, so it's not really. My question is, when in any manifesto was it mentioned to abolish the Forestry Commission? And when it comes to the consultation, are we being presented with just 5 questions, 5 choices, which we don't want, because none of us want to lose the Forestry Commission?
No, there's no plan to abolish the Forestry Commission at all. The proposal is its role would continue to regulate the sector and to do those other things. What it wouldn't do is be a large-scale manager of significant forestry land. But we're not abolishing it at all.
This lady.
I'm just wondering why you think there is actually a need to transfer it to a charitable trust, because to be honest, in my opinion anyway, I think the Forestry Commission are doing a fine job, and is there anything
No one's saying the Forestry Commission are dreadful, but it's also not the case that anyone can say, and I don't think they would say themselves, that they're perfect. Because she's shaking her head, so let me let you come back.
You're saying about the fact that they might not be perfect, but how do you know that a charitable trust would be perfect?
What the government's laid out is a consultation document. It makes it very clear the government's proposal is subject to consultation, and one of the questions in there actually asks people, do you agree or not with the government's proposal to transfer the ownership or management of heritage forests, like the Forest of Dean and New Forest, to a charitable trust? If you don't think that's a good idea, then say you disagree, and perhaps put some details, there's plenty of spaces in the consultation document, say why you don't think that's right.
Can I defer to Rich, please? Can I defer my question to Rich, and I'll take it afterwards?
That's fine, Rich.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Why don't you do the honourable thing for your party and for yourself? 400,000 people and rising have voted against this on the 38 Degrees website. 10,000 people have signed a petition in the Forest of Dean. 3,000 people came out in a snowstorm, freezing cold, to tell you how we feel about it. thousands and thousands of people are looking at the HOOF website. Just call a halt to it now and say, we've made a mistake, let's call a halt to it, let's do away with the public bodies, the forestry sections of the Public Forest Bill, and let's get on with our business, because for 3 months...
My undying memory of the event really was him leaving, and this sort of chaos of being surrounded by police, having to be protected, I think in his view, certainly not in anyone else's view, from the anger of his constituents around him.
I suppose by that time we'd got the forest absolutely plastered with our placards and yellow ribbons. Mrs. Spellman, sort of mid-January or late January, instructed the Forestry Commission to remove all the placards because they obviously were getting to her. And we said to the Forestry Commission, well, we can't expose your people to having to take down our placards because it might, you know, we don't want any rumpus with the Forestry Commission staff. We'll take them down, but give us a week. And Kevin Stannard, bless him, agreed to that.
I wandered up to our local village shop to buy some stamps, and when I got into the shop, one of my neighbours said to me, "Oh, congratulations, you've won." And I said, "We've won? What have we won?" "Well, you've won the battle. They're not going to sell the forest."
I am sorry. We got this one wrong, but we have listened to people's concerns.
The consultation was withdrawn, and instead of having to protest about the lack of the limitation of free speech by government, we were able to celebrate by taking down some signs outside Speech House.
When we're in a bunch of people, the confidence to sing and use that singing to mean something is really key. It's what words and music are about, really. Traditions of folk or whatever, about telling stories and people having a voice.
Just like to say that when I heard the news, I got out of my car and hugged the first tree I could find. Can I do it now? Yeah, you do it. Action photo. Oh,
And during that weekend we removed pretty well every sign and yellow ribbon from across the forest. It was wonderful how it just disappeared like that.
When the government did the U-turn, I thought, okay, good for them. They've actually realised that they've made a mistake, and they've said they made a mistake. But let's make sure we see this through now, because of course they said they were going to stop, but they didn't actually say what they were going to do. Then we went on to the next phase then of the construction of the panel, the independent panel, which tragically didn't involve any of the campaign groups that had fought to save the Forest of Dean, or any other public forest. I think that was a big mistake, big mistake.
The panel was eventually announced, and to our joy, the panel decided it would come to the Forest of Dean first. Now, I think probably because they were a bit scared and they wanted to get it over with. But they came, it was held at Speech House. Bishop James turned out to be an absolutely fabulous character. Did its work, it met, it brought out an enormously favourable report. And then we went into a sort of limbo really, where government was supposed to be deciding its response to to this panel's report, and that eventually came out, I think probably on the 30th of June 2012, and it seemed very positive. But when we got down to detail, we found that it wasn't quite as positive. There were various ways of interpreting what the panel had recommended, and the government proposals didn't suit everybody, including HOOF.
So after all our action, the government came back with the independent report from the Bishop of Liverpool and said, well, we thought it said, that the forest would be saved in perpetuity forever. Perhaps I was certainly personally a bit naive about that, because it turns out that I think they're just going to be much more clever about it in the future, and we have to redouble our efforts, because the chances are they will come back and they do see the Forest of Dean as a resource from where they can make money.
One of the last things I want to say is that we've been campaigning for 3 years now. We've been through a campaign stage, we've been through panel report, we've been through engagement with DEFRA and the Forestry Commission, and we're still not there. We're still not safe. We need to work harder to get a good solution for everybody, and to make sure that the public forest estate is safe in perpetuity for us all. And that's where we need to keep on fighting.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from the coast of Cornwall to the Scottish Highlands, from the sacred forests to the holy islands. This land was made for you and me. As I walked out through the homeless counties, the traffic raging all around me, I closed my eyes and dreamed how it could be. This land